Welcome to another Kame House lobby with the 2MK team. As always, we are playing Dragon Ball Fighters on this Thursday. And you will have to deal with my smokier voice, but this is probably because I have a lot more to talk about today and can't afford to wear my voice out. We have mentioned that this year is the year of execution. The main understanding of how to play the games that we are playing has shifted around at least enough that most of us feel comfortable. But if you don't feel comfortable with your execution in a game like Dragon Ball Fighters, stuff gets really complicated. One of the first things that becomes difficult for people who play this type of game and are not comfortable yet is the idea of the jump cancel. The jump cancel is actually confusing partially because it doesn't have anything to do with what you'd expect from any other game either. Where a jump cancel happens is not where you'd expect it to come from. In this game, a jump cancel happens after you've swept your opponent's feet and then gone for a standing attack after that, which is kind of weird because why would you do this? Every other game we play, if we've hit the opponent's legs, it's time to combo directly into something, not a standing attack. But it is relatively important to understand how to do this, because it starts up a lot of really damaging combos. Neutral in this game is, honestly, at relatively higher levels, nowhere near what you'd expect from most games. It's a lot of staying very far away from each other, and really not actually sticking out that many buttons or approaching in any way other than super dashing, probably. Hence the way our bots function. We try to teach you how to do those things, because even if there is a different way to play this game, most people don't play it that way, so this is where we are. There's no point in trying to beat out opponents' buttons, no specific reason to try to get in from mid-screen unless you've got a character who's really good at that. You just stay really far away and wait for someone to make a mistake. But once you've gotten to that mid-screen, usually in a scramble, you are going for your hit, and that hit is meant to get you some damage. And without the execution to actually get that damage, you're going to be a little sad. Learning all the combos in this game is often fairly stressful as a result because you don't really have a lot of options in terms of whether or not you learn them. Combos all have specific places that they need to be, and that's about it. The mental stressors therefore get bigger and bigger because you end up feeling about all these things that you need to do to play properly, many of which are execution. But as we've always taught, execution is a way to get damage. It is a reward for playing neutral correctly. It is not generally the game. And getting too caught up in your execution makes it very difficult to recognize when you need to shift something about the way you face an opponent. This is why we've often encouraged people to learn to play with the simpler things. If you know how to do X or Y, just do that until you feel you've gotten an understanding of the actual natural flow of the game, rather than bogging yourself down in combos. This generally applies if you don't have a lot of time to play and don't have a lot of time to practice those combos. Since we only really play this game to test bots and in this lounge, it comes up quite a lot. It's easy for certain of our players who have characters who do heavy damage in other games, who don't really end up playing a lot of neutral or have the capacity to do so, to have problems in this format simply because of that. It's hard sometimes to get used to the idea that you have to be able to execute certain things in order to play at the level you're used to. Even if the same thing happened in the game before, you probably had time to learn the combos as you went. Being thrown into a new game where either the combos are easier or you're facing people who just have had more time to practice them can really make you feel as if you don't know what you're doing, even if you're playing quite well. In general though, rewatching your matches helps, understanding your opponent's flow helps, and trying not to get too caught up in whether or not you are winning or losing, but something very similar to how we use bots. Rather than count, have I defeated my opponent? Until you know your combos, treat the entire experience very similarly. You know you're going to lose. You know your opponent will do a certain set of things. Count how many times you land the hit. And not just luckily land the hit. A hit you intended to land, a hit you understood that it was going to happen, that it should happen. Just count in your head. So I knew my opponent was going to be there. I dropped the combo, but I knew they were going to be there. I knew they were going to do that. I responded accordingly. I landed the first hit and I couldn't finish the combo, but you still count it as one. And part of the reason why we so often say count to 10 for bots is because if you can do 10 things correctly before your opponent can take all your life away, in nearly every game, that means you've won the fight. In Dragon Ball, even with the 3 characters, the amount of damage done by high-level players in this game, or even players who just know really strong combos, that's about right. In fact, the more I watch Dragon Ball high-level footage, the more I think 10 might be a little high. But 10's still a good number to try to count to, because it means that if you counted to 10, it probably means you've just won directly. You can even count the times your opponent has made a mistake, just to keep the number going up, and understand that you can just win sometimes by your opponent making mistakes. Unless it was a really silly one, there's a decent chance that they made that mistake because of something good that you were doing in neutral. One's ability to keep score in this way can really shift your perception of how well you're doing at the game, but it obviously doesn't actually help your execution at all. And unless it causes each moment you count to stick in your mind, it can be difficult to get a lot out of it because it's hard to recognize which combos to practice. Fortunately, for most of us, this game doesn't actually have a lot of combos. It has a lot of small pieces of combo sequences that need to be put together correctly and executed correctly in order to get what you need from them. Whether or not you can finish them with big supers or combinations or so on isn't always that required. This also means that feeling that you have to push on your opponent, get in, and so on, isn't really true. You're mostly looking for that moment to land one thing and do some damage from there. One good combo to understand for many characters is in the air, light, down, heavy. Almost all of the Shoto style characters have this combo. And it extends into another super dash most of the time. So while you do have to understand the whole thing, after say your Dragon Rush, you can just do that. Chances are it's just going to work, even if it doesn't work super well. For Jiren, he actually has something related to his beam blasts as his special there. But generally you can remember it as a character generality thing, just the way that you'd remember in a game like Street Fighter or most of the other games on the planet actually. These characters have the Shoryuken style motion. You can remember these other characters have the light, down, heavy. Certain other characters have slightly different combos. Piccolo, for example, does not have light, down, heavy. He has a bunch of other words. The jump cancel was the other thing we mentioned. Most of the time you are looking to see if you can hit your opponent with your crouch medium, because if you can, then you can start a big combo. That's about it. Is it time for crouch medium or not? The answer is usually not, because people don't generally let themselves get hit like that. But auto combos are in existence in the game to give you the idea of how to get started. There is some difference though. There are specific requirements for hitting those lights, executional requirements, as simply hitting lights twice will give you an aerial auto combo rather than the thing I'm talking about. The good part is that the auto combo basically comes out even if you did hit light, down, heavy. Without being able to do this, it will just cause the exact same combo you had before. Therefore, you don't actually have to worry about the middle phase of learning this combo. You simply attempt to learn it by hitting the same sequence of buttons, even if it's not yet time to understand how to do it properly. The game also contains quite a lot of this, that moment where you can get the better combo, but if you press the same things for the better combo, you will just get something good anyway. You can similarly do this with the jump cancel for many characters actually. Because you can get to the up requirement of the jump cancel after going for a quarter circle forward, your best bet is to, from the down position, do the quarter circle to up, or to up forward rather, and then stop and hit the button. If you have managed to delay long enough, when you hit the button, you will do the jump cancel. If you have not delayed long enough, when you hit the button, you will do a move. For most characters, this move is good enough. From there, you can begin to work on execution and understanding of your characters enough to feel comfortable with them, and not feel as if you have to outperform drastically in order to get any damage.
About to start. Good luck.
Most combo videos you watch online for this game do a fairly good job of breaking this down, but they don't generally explain it that well. They will generally show you first the mid-screen combos, then corner combos, then sparking blast combos, then specific ones using either vanish in the corner or very specific uses of the character or the supers the character uses. Finally, they generally move on to showing combos with specific assists, just to let you know if you really needed to go from 100% health to dead, these are the characters you probably have to have on the team to start from and do it, and that's it. But often, you're lacking the little pieces of information that clear up how this even works. It can easily look as if they're just hitting some long sequence of stuff that you could never learn or memorize. But for nearly every character in the game, the jump cancel is in fact crouch medium, stand medium. And then up forward to jump. What differs a little bit is what follows that. The Goku-style characters, that's considered them the equivalent of the Shotos in the game, often hit a medium here. The more technical characters have a tendency to hit a light button, and a couple of the big bodies go straight into crouch heavy on the jump, or do a special. But that's about it. For the most part, that's all you're learning. Do I hit this, this, or this after my jump cancel? And then, from there, you go into the next part of the sequence. The next part of the sequence is also the part that you do after a super dash, most of the time. Interestingly, for Goku, he seems to do the entire thing the same way. I guess they were trying to make him nice and simple to be understood. In other words, for Goku, you basically do medium, after your jump cancel, and you also do medium after the super dash. The interesting thing about him and his ilk is that after that medium, you can do a relatively complex string with light, crouch heavy as mentioned before. But that's it. You repeat these sequences until you get to the point where you should actually do the auto combo or do his Tatsu style move, and that's it. Almost every character is a bunch of formulaic sequences that you are putting together to get what you need. Even their more complex combos often just involve a place where those sequences would have dropped the opponent out of the combo, and they have managed to find which assist in the game they can call to continue hitting the opponent. Or which special ability they can use for their character in the corner that allows them to keep hitting the opponent. Or obviously, a combination of the two of those things. Most combos are not built up around direct specific positioning, at least not for the internal parts of the sequence. They simply put together sequence points and change or add things as necessary. Some characters are better at keeping combos going for long periods on their own, thanks to having diagonally down and somewhat explosive ki blasts. For example, Jiren and Teen Gohan. And these characters are still just going to follow a similar sequence. They knock the opponent away and down, they ki blast them, they super dash, and they start over. So let's look at Goku in this case. Whenever Goku hits an opponent with a super dash, the general thing we want to hit directly after is one medium, and then whatever. We're not worrying about the rest of it right now. Same goes for Goku Black, actually. If anything has resulted in a super dash being the option, this is the thing we care about. But since that is not really something that comes up too often in the match, we don't actually care. We only care at the moment where somehow it has become a useful thing. Since so much of this game is outmaneuvering the opponent and using your assists, as noted, we generally don't spend a lot of time figuring out how to achieve this part, as there's nothing worse than being a player of a game who knows a ton of combos and cannot land any of them. It's just embarrassing, honestly. But it is important to pull all your effort into these things once you have learned the matchups, once you have counted off your successes and hits you meant to land and did not mean to land. Jiren's one good example in that he gets the super dash after that setup. He can simply hit the opponent with the rush after the dragon rush to knock them into the air, and depending on how they recover, Jiren just goes underneath him and super dashes up. Since he's almost impossible to track and he's really not a character you can just go, okay fine, I'll just attack you then. His life becomes fairly easy in that regard. He gets to keep going much better than most people. One of the other things we've been studying recently from Amara's side specifically is the importance of making sure you end up where you want to after your combo. Because this is one of the more important things for the style of player she is. She's good at setting up things, good at getting dragon rushes and mixing up the opponent's concept of where she's going to try to be. But if that is lost at the end of a dragon rush setup, it's really sad. But you can make a lot of difference to your style, even without drastically increasing your executional ability, by learning to execute the things that will put you where you want to be at the end of your combos.
Showdown is about to begin! Ready?
The automatic position that the game offers you after certain simpler combos is usually not the one you want. If you happen to be lucky and your assists or your playstyle mesh really well with where you end up without even making any effort, that's often great, but most fighting games are relatively tuned in a way intended to give players who spend more time playing more advantages, and it's often good to give them more advantages of that kind, where new players still get to feel strong, they still get to hit things, they don't have to be locked down or unable to function, but you can still see the gap because of things like pressure spacing, and advantages in terms of meter and other expectations. However, we do not currently have any bots whose sole purpose is to teach you this, as the idea is, once one has gotten far enough with the two specific ones, that you can simply extend the combos you know into those spaces. We definitely have bots where the intention is that you can hit the stand heavy, and once you've learned to hit the stand heavy, well obviously you can generally cancel into super dash and generally cancel into those combos. Similarly, there are bots to teach you how to land crouch heavy from a decent distance, and at least one to teach you how to super dash in and react to differences in where your opponent is in the air or on the ground when your super dash connects. Dragon Rush you can just practice on your own, as even though obviously there is also a bot to teach you how and when to Dragon Rush, there's not as much of a mix-up there. You don't always have to worry about, wait, where was I relative to this? Is there a possibility that I'm not in the range I expected? None of those things tend to come up for the Dragon Rush in the same way. So once you are learning combos, which you can literally just get off the internet at this point, this game is not one where extremely complicated setups are things you often have to come up with on your own. Simply find where in your play or practice these come up and do your best to apply them. Doing so under stress is a little harder to simulate, of course. And that is why the team generally trains with bots even for this, as learning to jump cancel against a stationary opponent that it will never block is really different than forcing yourself to do it in that situation.
Showdown is about to begin.
Similarly, if you're the type that gets discouraged easily when you feel as if your opponent doesn't need to respect you or just wins relatively easily by doing a lot of damage, understand that most people who actually have spent time learning combos in this game, and definitely people who played a lot of other fighting games, are generally aware that this game just has long combos. They're not necessarily thinking, well, you suck, you got totally outplayed. They care about it at the moment where they realize that you are losing in neutral, that you are not managing to keep up with them in particular spaces, or similar. But things like, oh, are you managing to dodge or block my pressure? Or can you actually stop me from doing big damage to you? These are less so a matter of your opponent thinking you're not strong enough, and more so a matter of them just understanding that they put in the work to do all the damage, and now you are subjected to that damage. There's no way around that. If they didn't do all the work, what was the point? Or rather, if they didn't get rewarded for all that work they did. Therefore, it's as important as possible for you to, in turn, to not get freaked out by those situations. Combos like that are just things that happen in Dragon Ball. Your ability to get out of them is a deciding factor in whether or not you can win, but not necessarily too strongly a deciding factor in whether or not you're good enough to win. It is usually without fail that you do have to practice the combos if you're facing an opponent who has much higher damage than you. After all, much higher damage means that they can win in less interactions. But it also means that you could play against them and have an equal number of successful interactions and starts, and they'll just win all the time. Certain characters in this game actually just have really long combos for the sake of positioning. As in, they don't actually hurt that much. They are intended to get you to a position where the opponent has advantage. If you spend too much time worried about the fact that you're taking a lot of damage, and not, this corner position is bad for me, I need to get out of here as quickly as possible. That was their intention, to get me here all along. Then you're more likely to lose, not because you actually took a lot of damage on the way to the corner, because sometimes you just don't, but because you didn't recognize that the problem was that you were getting near to the corner.
ざいました。小さい頃のごはんくんか。昔から可愛い顔してたのね。
So on that note, let's go back to talking about some specifics of execution.
Time to begin the match.
While jump cancelling from the ground is relatively important, jump cancelling in the air is somewhat less so for the beginning player. And as you'd expect, based on the design principles as mentioned before, it's also harder to do. Your character will generally continue going up and forward, and if you keep on hitting light in those situations, they will do an aerial auto combo. However, any back direction... Is it any? I think it is any. It's one of those things that you learn to do physically, something that you don't end up spending a lot of time thinking about because you just physically know how to do it, and therefore do it. But we know for sure that back and up back will do it for you. Just flicking those for a moment will remove your character from the state, and up back is more helpful in a lot of cases because it will then lead to you going straight to up forward, which is itself the jump cancel. So you can think of it as up back light, up forward light, and you have done the aerial jump cancel. This is, as mentioned, difficult relative to the other things that are in the game. After all, you can't really say much things are easier than hit light until your opponent is down, i.e. the auto combo. But once you have it, or at least the idea of it, generally you're not in too much danger. Or you can pick characters who don't need to do any of that and who can just cancel into specials in the air for similar effect. If you're not the type of player who feels comfortable trying to do that, there are a few characters in this game that just don't need to do it and can still get decent damage from their effort. This is, as noted, a US East Coast 2 lobby. You can find this information in our tweet, which generally we send out on 2_MK_FGC at the beginning of streams. And often you can find some of the information, if not all of it, in the stream title so that you can find your way in if you wish to play along with us. We've been testing out neither stays on as a lobby option for this game. It's particularly helpful once you've gotten to higher than 4 players, as it tends to cause people to circle around in interesting ways. Sparking Blast Cancel, another type of combo you will often find in Seto's combo videos. Usually very damaging, but often difficult to actually benefit from, as if you end up doing it at the wrong timing, your opponent will end up getting to switch out. It's normally best done for the kill, but suddenly they can't afford to wait until then. This is often why we suggest that when you are dealing with cornered characters, that you decide, am I going to use sparking or am I going to use my level 3? Because you don't really have a lot of time to deal with the situation. The game is a very high damage game, and therefore you can't necessarily afford to play around, let's say. If you're used to games that move a little slower, it can be hard to get yourself to understand this as a natural movement mechanism. Being in the corner is the most dangerous place in all fighting games, but for this type of game, it's particularly devastating, and therefore people spend a lot of time working out to get you and keep you there. So it's often in your best interest to at least consider whether or not you should do the level 3 just to make your opponent think about this in the future. Long set, this is super important. In our training games, it's a little bit less important to actually do this, as most of the time we're not really trying to get that sort of thing. And the opponent will often respect you in the corner even if you never actually do the level 3.
It's time to face your opponent.
Understanding the synergy of your own team is also related to this, as if you're the type of person who needs to do long combos in particular ways, you may need a team that synergizes into these combos. Some do it by assists, and others do it by simply calling in the other character in the middle of the combo. If the assist is available, the swap is often also available. The swap form of this is often a little less useful or powerful for corner combos though, and tends to be a bit less overwhelming, as it then removes the ability to use the assist in neutral for any other reason, in much the same way. One should generally be careful when playing characters who are able to do specials in these positions though, as it's often too easy to get caught up in it, and if you mistime it or your opponent was out of range in a way you didn't expect, or more importantly, manages to tech out in a direction you didn't expect, you're usually at much more risk than the standard character who actually deals with it the other way. The team has about a half and half split between characters who benefit immediately from doing specials within their strings and those that do not. So you get to see both sides played out quite often. But if you're not sure about it, you can quite quickly check based on who's playing. Rune Siren and the Wolf tend to have characters who benefit from doing specials in their strings. Whereas Omni Rabbit, any characters played on the Rillian account, and Natacon tend to have a lot less. So in terms of people you generally see in our lounges fairly often, you can watch for those character types to see which ones you prefer most of the time. Let's shift around opponents a little bit for now. And get our rotate on.
Get ready for a Dragon Ball Rumble!
In general, learning the matchups through any means is just as effective. Normally, matchups are a difficult thing to get used to while you are also focusing on learning combos or even learning neutral, meaning that you generally don't want to do it right away. Or, the other option is that you do learn it right away, but we generally suggest learning matchups after neutral because understanding that you can do something does not help you if you don't know what your options to do things are. And since different characters do have just slightly different enough options, you do have to worry about it a bit. One character's game plan may not work as well for another, not necessarily because of their ability to do damage once they get started, but rather their ability to set up a situation where they can get started, i.e. neutral itself. We do know, for example, that Broly's style of play involves being able to super dash quite a lot, and otherwise frustrate the opponent who does not want to deal with those super dashes by using armor or other blasting moves. He can then use all of the built-up meter to play a very relatively strong Vanish game without ever needing to be able to land any supers. He's a very strange character compared to the rest of this game. The only character we've seen that plays much like this is Cooler, and he's not quite as good at it in most situations. Even the resident other big body Android 16 does not quite do the whole I'm going to super dash whenever I feel like and come at you all the time. He tends to be more so super dashing a lot and then bouncing off and waiting for the opponent to make a mistake. Not much match for Team Gohan as a whole, given that Team Gohan is so good at punishes. However, he is better at locking down space than Broly is, as Broly often depends on the opponent's wish to attack him. So for example, in this case, understanding that you have the option to sometimes hit Broly or 16 after their super dash, and sometimes don't have quite the same options, is no help to you if you don't know what exactly you should hit them with. Nothing like an overcomplicated situation to make you feel a little out of it in terms of your own capability. Similarly, Broly and 16 for that reason have a lot of advantage against characters who need to or often do stay in the air, as most air specials do not easily stop super dashes. You normally need very well-timed air normals. And since most of what you do once you block a super dash in the air depends on the opposing character's options, they have good options, so you often end up having to stay on the ground for longer.
Showdown is about to begin!
Well, we're an hour into the stream, so let's do both a little matchup work and a little demonstration of the counting perspective here. We know that generally, player at advantage in this matchup is Omni Rabbit, so we're going to end up counting for Rune Siren. We're not more so looking at things like zoning or just stray hits to keep out, but rather moments of either perfect defense in neutral or finding the right opportunity. That counts as one, not necessarily because it landed anything, but because it was a quick way to resolve the problem of Kid Buu being pushed to the corner and recognition of having the space and opportunity to do so. Another decently good timing for shifting Kid Buu back in instead. So we're at 2. That one could have been random, but if it was not, it was simply recognizing the opponent was likely to wait and taking advantage of that to do a move and a sequence that works very well on Kid Buu for solving that problem of being in the corner. He's one of the better characters at getting out of the corner if the opponent gives him just enough space to do so. We'll count that Crouch Heavy versus Trunks assist as well. So we are now at 4. You can easily see that if you are mostly forced to play neutral, and your opponent does not get to land any of their larger combos, this setup is actually useful for you. You simply end up keeping up with them until you actually do get hit with the combo. And it can take quite a while for someone who has not managed to clip you in neutral to get a really good combo going. They may even end up using up meter, which they would otherwise need to do big damage, on various other things, making it less likely at least that you will die. That one was pressure, but we're still going to count it. Along with some other little things that happen really quickly, we're now at 7. Eight. And the dropout. As we've noted many times, the Super Dash is not really a good scalar starter. When you have landed a Super Dash on your opponent, most of the time it does not result in you dealing a lot of damage, even if you do a really good combo afterwards. Meaning that if your method of getting the opponent opened up was the Super Dash, you don't often want to take that opportunity to tack on supers onto the end of that damage as well, as they're mostly not quite wasted, but unless they're really close to kill, it's not going to benefit you as much as holding on to that meter and looking more so for a better situation for yourself in some method. In fact, this match is basically let's keep Omni Rabbit from actually dealing combo damage to me as long as possible. And as a result, the match lasts far longer. So we stopped counting somewhat, but we can be reasonably sure that somewhere in there, Musaiman did reach either 9 or 10. If you feel you got completely overwhelmed in a match, it's often because that counting score ended up low. But if you were looking for those moments, rather than worrying too much about how much damage you took, your mind changes the way it perceives the game to look for the moments where you can raise your count. If you fail at it, then they also stick in your head a little better, and it's a little easier to remember the situation that did not go the way you planned and how to deal with it. Amara's relentlessness is one of the few styles of play that can force the wolf to actually stay on defense, as he knows he's likely to get more options to do damage of his own by doing that. But by the same method, Amara could simply quote-unquote count the likelihood of this working and therefore end up attacking less, forcing the wolf to find a way in and therefore shift his own game plan. Similarly, if one learns to count things like hitting with my assist, as the bots often make you think of, you can shift whether or not you think a particular position or situation is scary or actually technically a payoff. In this situation, styles of play often lead to you also having a lot more meter to do things like this with, and a lot higher understanding of where your opponent can be at any given time. It is often our nature to be stressed by the opponent being close to us in fighting games though, particularly games like this where there seems to be a lot going on at once. But this is also the reason why high-level play is often so hyped simply in terms of how long could you manage to block, as most people find this extremely impressive if you can keep it up for long enough. That said, this is all, in the end, still functionally neutral. Your executional ability is not the thing you're testing, when we start talking about counting. This is an extension of that, in that if you can land it, you end up dealing with something different. It generally is your aim to make that something different what you want it to be instead of what your opponent does, or just anything your opponent benefits from at all. This is also the sort of thing commentators are looking at in general. If they're familiar with the game, they're used to seeing long combos. The things they're looking for and talking about most of the time are those key moments where some small thing has changed. They're looking for the thing that causes the combo to start, rather than being hype about the flashy combo itself. The hard combo is just a question of did you drop it, which also obviously gets some input. A lot of that interaction we just saw, for example, was more so about Omni-Rabbit's ability to defend long enough in the corner to actually get back out again, and shown once again. Strong conversions of the crouch medium and similar are obviously vastly contributive to whether or not you can win the match, but those are the things that you practice on your own time, so to speak. Playing the neutral is something that requires another person. The understanding of when should I hit this stand heavy, when should I hit this crouch medium. That match, therefore, was decided at the anti-air. Similarly, that quiet moment in opening your opponent up is more or less the same thing. If you have the type of character that has a method to do this, if you can get your opponent just to hesitate for a little bit, then that is similarly what you are counting, the concept of offense. Whether that be a standard crouch medium because of some other aspect of skill your character has to make the opponent want to back off, or the command grab effect. To confuse them as much as possible. That is why this game is technically simpler than a lot of other games we actually play, despite being at this speed. Once you actually understand the characters, specifically your own characters, and a few matchups, the complexity is not in a matter of the number of different things you need to memorize, but simply number of different things you need to be able to do, which is partially why the team spends so much less time practicing this than other things. If you want to be a professional Dragon Ball FighterZ player, you obviously have to work way harder, as you can't afford to drop any combos or any situations. But to have fun, to understand it, to just enjoy playing your characters, if you like the game for what it is, can appreciate its nature, you generally don't have to worry too much about necessarily learning all of the combos in order to get to play that aspect of it. It's only a problem if you really desperately want to win. If you've got a lot of time to practice, then absolutely learn and practice your combos. And then focus on where to apply them through other methods. If you don't have a lot of time to practice, you're probably going to have at least a bit more fun by learning the neutral, as players who know how to keep you in good positions will entirely outmaneuver you. It is possible for you to know a lot of combos but unfortunately never be able to land them.
Are you ready?
Anyone who's watched our streams before knows that this match tends to be a lot more even. Mostly because of the strange matchups these characters have with each other. But it does help that many of the matchups here don't have to play a lot of neutral in the first place. Since at least 4 of the characters in these teams, in total, get to basically super dash whenever they want, there's a lot of motion in that regard. However, obviously, you have the other side. Players who are very aware of all the ways they can be punished for super dash and keeping up those mix-ups are also most likely to be able to actually think about that situation as something other than a simple response, and therefore are more likely to have proper defense for the moment in question. As the game also changes phases, getting toward the end where you have less assists to cover you, your execution becomes more important, making it even more likely that even after a long, relatively even set, the player with the higher execution and understanding of their combos wins out in the end if you are brought down to what we have heard called an anchor duel. Sometimes it's not actually your anchors dueling, just two characters left and that's it, but still, you will often find yourself facing this situation, and in those cases, yes, your execution absolutely can matter. But execution still takes a backseat to neutral and matchup knowledge. It is only in the situation where you have a similar state for both players in both execution and matchup knowledge, and the matchup itself is not tilted, that execution is the true decider of the game a lot of the time, unless the gap between the player's skill of other types, or even of execution type, is rather large. One person could learn just a few combos, but be really good at landing those combos. The other knows every combo in the book, but that alone be confusing. This is another situation of a character who is good at causing stress if you don't start thinking about how much damage she's actually doing. Vidal takes forever to wear people down. She's super good at sticking to them if she actually manages to get close, and she's decent at getting close, especially if she has the right assists. But the sheer amount of time she puts into this can be kind of scary if you're not used to having to deal with a character that simply has to put in this much effort. From the other side, therefore, it's often automatic a feeling that you should respond to Vidal whenever you can or you'll never hit her. But this is absolutely incorrect. Most of the time, Vidal has to stop eventually. Or use up a lot of meter, as you've seen here, to still do what is technically only moderate damage. Therefore, you should generally be watching for the moment after it, which is the one that is important. As a result, she's a character who's very good at getting people to try to hit her and miss, therefore making her more dangerous. She's not necessarily that hard to react to if you're primed to do only that. But as she is so sprightly, it's very hard to get yourself to just don't respond until you see her actually do something you can beat. Especially if you're unfamiliar and don't know what that is. Fortunately, for those of us who are not familiar with the character, nearly everything Vidal does is actually beatable. Tenshinhan has similar problems, actually. His neutral is not the greatest. He's good at getting to you and making you want to counterattack him. But if he doesn't manage those things, you are often in a good situation. He's not a character who often just keeps on hitting buttons, and when he does, he often needs assist to keep him going. Meaning that your best option is often to wait and see what he does, as he'll often have to jump away from you, or end his combo a little early, and you can just pursue him then, rather than trying to hit him in the middle of it. Their advantage is that they don't generally stay on the ground while they're doing this, making it a little bit harder to land things like Dragon Rush punishes. One thing you can do, however, is simply walk forward. Interestingly, this has a really strange effect on both these characters, as they don't actually have a lot of strong attacks from the air that you can't just block on reaction. Many of which, if you are practiced, you can just 2H on reaction, meaning that they're not likely to risk this as much.
It's time to face your opponent.
Making sure that you don't get caught up in playing specific forms of neutral because of previous experiences in other games is one of the hardest things about switching from game to game. When a game has a different flow to it, even just one new mechanic can throw you off, as you're not used to the resultant situations from that mechanic. Since so much of Dragon Ball FighterZ is played from relatively far away, it's one of those games that's easier to understand if you played a lot of Under Night, with the well-known full-screen footsies. One of the most important things in both Under Night and this game, therefore, is recognizing that a large part of defense is what we were talking about on yesterday's Street Fighter stream. When you don't think your opponent is going to attack you, stand still. Every time you move, it changes the position and situation, and by the time you realize that you were holding back and therefore moved out of the range you wanted to be in, it's too late and your opponent is either going to make an escape or an attack, neither of which you might be ready for. Sometimes it's necessary to hold down back as you have to worry about some sort of long full screen or mid-screen low from the opposing character. But most of the time that's not what we're talking about. If you were the type to be holding down back in the first place, you didn't have the problem. Similarly, therefore, you should focus yourself on trying to recognize, why am I blocking? And if you're the type that has a certain level of... I don't know a word for this. It's that thing that makes you attack as soon as you're not blocking. You're either blocking or attacking. You may recognize that a lot of the time you've recognized that you don't need to block, but as a result you've autopiloted yourself into an unnecessary attack. In a faster-paced game, this effect gets multiplied drastically and can cause you real problems. It compounds relatively easily with the feeling that as soon as you've seen your opponent move, it's time to hit a button to make sure that they don't get near you. This is generally just as ineffective as blocking too much. You can try to see how much damage you actually end up taking if you drop your guard for a bit. You will definitely take damage, but maybe you'll surprise yourself at how often that actually happens. The ability to assess different things in the game is one of the things most important for getting better at it directly.
The battle's about to start. Good luck. Ready?
Fast-paced games are very likely to pull and lull the player into a sense of filling space with buttons. Sometimes even filling space with specials. The problem with this style is that it will get you decently far, mid-far, but as soon as you meet higher level players, true high level players, they'll just recognize this hole in your game and start looking for which buttons you hit, your pet buttons, as noted before, and convert into big damage as a result of it, which is not something you always face against other players who are a little less good at converting stray hits into big damage. High-level players often optimize quite a lot in terms of how to do this though, leaving you high and dry in those moments.
Sit down. Win.
小さい頃のごはんくんか。昔から可愛い顔してたのね。
As you can see here, recognizing that moment where your opponent thinks it's time to back off and giving them the breathing room to do that, especially if you're just going to hold down back yourself, is often safer than hitting any buttons immediately. Your opponent's intention is to get away from you, to make sure that they don't get caught in anything you hit. Which means they often are quite devoted to something like a back jump, or a move intended to save them from anything you might try to hit. In short, this means that your Dragon Rush is unlikely to land, and so is your zoning, but at least zoning will catch them most of the time. Zoners do have the additional advantage of being able to stop the opposing assist from reaching them in these situations without actually any effort. When a game moves at this speed, your job is often to anticipate where your opponent is wanting to be, rather than trying to hit where they are. As most of the time their general aim is to not be there in a moment. You can also use a lot of traits such as what you've just seen to at least minimize the damage you take if they do certain things. This is among the stronger ways to get Dragon Rushes on other people at the mid-levels. And is the only way to play for corner guard and to use your corner guarding skills in DBFZ, as it is not really a very high level thing. Generally one wants to pressure people in the corner with your assists, but if your team is not good at this, then corner guard is still something worth having at least a little of. And it's always the beauty of Wake Up Level 3. If your character's level 3 happens to hit opponents who are jumping, it's even better. Oh, one note is that the main problem with guard cancel these days is that as much as people complained, it's actually not that strong. This is primarily because guard cancel is beaten by the same things that super dash is. Most people are not obviously able to do this easily as a lot of their combos are in the air, but as we learned fairly early on in our tests, many characters in this game can hit either their jump medium or their jump light at a particular timing to stuff super dashes. This also means that it works on guard cancels, meaning you can literally bait guard cancels in combos that technically would still be pressure. While it's not something that you should be expecting to see a lot of, it's approximately the equivalent of baiting a V-reversal, and therefore is still going to happen quite a lot in fact. The guard cancel is of course much stronger now, as any opponent who is not intending to bait it and just wants to keep on attacking will generally end up in a bad situation. But guard cancelling out at the wrong time just puts you back in the same situation or worse. A few characters, including Kid Buu, seem to have something akin to an option select that allows them to keep up their pressure along with a certain assist, let's say Yamcha, and simply, rather than do all of the pressure with Kid Buu, add additional Yamcha steps so that the opponent cannot guard cancel without being beaten by the anti-move from Kid Buu, basically jump light into Buu Ball. So do look out for this if you are interested in using guard cancel as a straight up defense. It's not necessarily that a lot of people are going to know it or use a ton of it, but you do have to be careful when you see certain assists used at timings where you think you didn't need to use an assist yet. But unfortunately, if you haven't had time to actually check that out and recognize it's happening, chances are you're going to get baited. It's always been a feature of these, people still like to call them Marvel style games, that understanding your opponent's intended escape route can be more important than understanding whether or not they can defend from you.
To begin the match.
We are of course still enjoying the effectiveness of Neither Stays On as a lounge system, as it has the interesting effect of being able to enforce that the winning player gets back into the loop quicker, meaning that you still get the semi-arcade effect where the winning player gets to play again sooner, but without the effect of them staying on the entire time. So even if you don't specifically think that's great and you believe the winning player should stay on all the time, if you are not a believer in that, or just have a friendly lounge like this, it seems as if it can be fairly useful for you. Like most command grab characters, Brawly will be very difficult to beat in certain situations if the player gets a good read on you and recognizes that you are not going to backdash out of their grabs. Jumping is not as good an option in Dragon Ball FighterZ for dealing with command grabs as a generality. Mostly invincible moves work better, and since obviously even if it were techable, or rather even if it were a Dragon Rush levels of techable, you would still have to react differently as it is a command grab. Characters who have instant jump moves are much more effective at this. However, the raw tag option also gets you out of this in most situations, meaning that you can use that against characters like Brawly once you feel the character's player has gotten you into that loop where they want to try to grab you. You can try tagging in one of your other characters. Once reduced to one character, obviously, your options are more limited. Hopefully by that time you'll have enough meter to do the level 3, or shift as an overall thing. Once cornered, obviously, the backdash is less useful, even though it will still evade Brawly's command grab, and often it will still let you get a punish. This game does contain the super jump, and this can also be a helpful thing, but this is only helpful on characters who have aerial moves that move them forward meaningfully, as Brawly will easily chase down most other characters as soon as his command grab is over with any number of options. Since the majority of the cast actually does have this type of move, however, it's not too much of a danger. One of the characters who mostly has to worry about this is in fact Teen and Adult Gohan. Even though Teen Gohan does have some good options for moving in the air, most of them don't beat Brawly's chase options. Seems that Omni Rabbit is in Otacons' head today, or at least at this point. But this is technically a demonstration of the same thing. Once you've learned to track your opponent's escape vectors, their intended getaway points, syncing your movement to those is often just straight damage. This is one of the most rewarding games in the business for that. Other games, most of the time, this allows you to keep up pressure. In Dragon Ball FighterZ, being able to track your opponent's intended escape route means you just get to keep doing even more damage, and usually it's a lot of it. as it's much easier to land big damaging attacks on an opponent who is trying to escape and fails than it is to just land damaging attacks on someone you're opening up. On top of this, managing this correctly tends to deny your opponent enough meter that you get advantage anyway. Characters who are good at tracking those escape options are generally stronger mix-up characters, and as we know, Unrabbit tends to play very strong mix-up characters. The easy way to counter someone who is tracking your escape options is to not try to escape. There's always a way around any tactic your opponent has decided to take on. And that is partially what we're seeing from Notakon here. There's no need to worry about the opponent trying to block off your escape routes if you just don't try to escape at all in the first place. Maybe delay a little bit, maybe jump back a little bit, sometimes just do nothing. Similarly, things like uppercuts and level 3s are an equally good way of dealing with this. One of the things that leads to us often saving those level 3s for the moment where we feel as if the opponent has a bead on our escape, and just using it as a counter to that rather than anything else. After all, an opponent who is tracking your escape, unless you have one of the less mobile characters in the game, must do something beforehand. Almost all the time, they must hit a button or make a movement, meaning that they're going to be open for the level 3 in almost all cases. So we're back in rotation for another Broly match. Broly does have the option to chase down. In fact, he has quite a few moves for it, but all of these moves are unsafe. Fortunately, for him, they also beat literally everything else. You can't backdash, you can't guard cancel, you can't raw tag, you can't uppercut. Well, technically you can uppercut, depending on who you're playing. Generally leaving you quite stuck in those situations. "16" makes a good partner to Broly in this because once the opponent has been conditioned to do one thing, Broly being a character you could technically walk away from, sort of. If you happen to be too far out, you could probably walk out of his command grab. 16 is not a character who you can walk away from, because he instead will hit more buttons with his long range and generally frustrating strings. Once again, most of the time you have to backdash or jump out, or go for the level 3. This is a general thing against big body grapplers. Super jump, or just jump forward sometimes. Depending on what they're able to do, you really won't get caught by it. Understanding where in a string to jump forward is often difficult, so most of the time super jump will save you one way or the other. Your decision as to what to do after your jump depends a lot on your character's options. If they have good aerial supers, you might be able to get something immediately, and if not, probably should just leave it.
Android 16 win.
残念だったな。戦闘力は俺の方が上だ。
Brace yourself for the coming battle. Get ready. Fight it out.
Despite the changes in the game, level 3 still have that property. If you hit with one, almost all of the health it does, if not all, is blue health and recoverable using sparking. However, forcing the sparking can still be a reasonable way to play if you believe you're going to regain enough meter. The key is relatively clear is whether or not you are actually going to get advantage after doing the level 3. Or not. certain characters get immediate advantage, certain characters get positional advantage. A few characters can do their level 3 and get no advantage at all, other than the damage it does. And for these characters, they have to really weigh whether or not they want to force that sparking, if they want to try to get the opponent to do it that way. Often, if they are in that situation, the opponent also does not have to worry about this in the straight sense, because they'll just switch characters. If you're early enough in, you're not thinking about the sparking in that way to begin with. In this case, we see that OmniRabbit has definitely managed to make something out of that use of sparking in that you can just use a different level 3 later on.
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Get ready!
In Dragon Ball FighterZ, it's a lot harder to walk your opponent to the corner. Most people will use their assists or take some other action fairly quickly to prevent this from happening to them. But zoning characters, interestingly, have the highest ability to walk their opponent to the corner, as they can make their attacks from far enough away that the opponent needs to continue blocking. And if they need to continue blocking, it's very likely that they're likely to either walk backward a lot more, or backdash in situations where they would otherwise try to stand their ground. Characters who are using beam style and zoning assists, both the type that come in from the air and the ground, are a decent addition to this as well. In short, you really don't have to figure out how to open your opponent up if you can force them to walk all the way to the corner where they will automatically have to deal with the potential. Your assists are your best option for this in almost all cases, even if they're not zoning style assists. The difference being that a zoner does not have to get near enough to their opponent to start pressure in order to call said assists. Everyone else is aiming to use the assist to get closer, or to call the assist while in close enough to get some pressure, but would otherwise have to stop. Once in the corner, assists tend to take on a much stronger system. tending to become more personalized to the player's team and style. At this point, the zoning assist tends to be a little less useful, but depends on what you intend to do, as they can easily cover a reposition to get you back out, and still generally give you enough time to get back in if the opponent didn't respond.
A fierce showdown is about to begin! Get ready!
まだ貫いてなんだわ
さてこいつはどうだ。さてこの私にバリーをそうだ。
Brawly is definitely one of those characters where you have to be ready with the punish very quickly, and you have to be able to recognize a lot of the things he does fairly quickly. But unlike many other characters of his type, he doesn't lose his effectiveness once you recognize the first thing he does. Meaning he still has all his mix-ups. He also simply has a bit more protection in that he is harder to punish for players who are not used to the second part. In other words, even if you block him, unless you know what you're doing and can recognize what he's doing, the outcome is not likely to be Brawly taking a ton of damage. His additional oppressive synergy with his teammates in this particular team means that pushing him out has so many layers that it's often tempting to specifically just use your level 3 to resolve the situation. Read on the Vanish In, but no Vanish In. I blinked and I couldn't even tell who won. But Gohan Ridge is victorious today.
The battle's about to start. Good luck! Get ready!
This is likely to be another one of those things, as Jasmine's defense is generally solid, but does tend to crack at very specific timings, the types of timing Videl can often cause. That said, trying to be tricky about it is likely to lead to trouble, so the onus is on Nadakon to do the work here. Especially since Justine is the one trained most in the standard of just, okay, I'll just stand still here because you're probably not going to do anything that is going to hurt me. Nappa is additionally a character who is really good at dealing with this, not necessarily because of his counter or even Cybermen, but simply because, as a character, he has so many spaces that he can attack from once he's in the air, that he doesn't have to stay on the ground. Pinning him on the ground is probably your best option at any given time, but as he is also easily able to switch into his teammates once he's in the air, you need to be at least a little bit careful about it. What a ham. And there's our aforementioned issues. Chasing down Videl or trying to intercept her directly on her approach are both extremely difficult things to do. And Justine's characters are not really equipped to instantly chase down much of anyone. Meaning that one of her best options is in fact to try to chase with assists rather than anything else, but this is fine as this is generally one of the options and main uses of her assists in the team. Chase down and punishes is basically what all three of them, of these ones at least, specialize in. Honestly, Gotenks does more or less the same thing now that I think about it. Why go after the opponent yourself when you can just ask someone else to do it for you? This does take some execution in a lot of ways though. Still, allowing you to stay on defense for longer is an optimal situation. But it's also a matchup question, as this is much easier to do against Videl and Tianjinhan as it is to do against Team Gohan, who really doesn't ever have to stop sticking to you in the first place. Once at least one assist is lost, the situation is much more in the attacker's favor. But depending on how much health was paid to set that up, it may still not necessarily be enough to do this way. In this case though, not much meter was paid, making it a little bit easier. In the tactical sense, therefore, the balance here is that Cell is really good at doing things on his own, and is therefore the optimal character to be left standing at the end. He may not be the best at chasing down even Videl, but as you see in Duo's team, he can super dash at basically any time he wants, and hopefully it will work out for him. So liberal use of meter and a little bit of craziness. Not likely to come out too strongly given the massive amount of advantage in meter that Team Gohan has and the capacity to therefore convert that into more or less immediate death. But still, in terms of strategically played close to the chest, I think they say it's the same. But let's make a quick switch.
Get ready for battle! Get ready! Fight it out!
やるじゃん。こう見えていくつも死闘を繰り広げてきたんだ。舐めてもらっちゃ困るぜ。
Get ready for battle!
But similar to the matchup with Omni Rabbit's defensive style, eventually the answer is to simply not try to escape in the first place. This is less effective by far though against just Vine style, as not doing this will cause you to get locked down by the assist and possibly at least have to deal with the Dragon Rush potential. It's a relatively simple style to apply. If you think the opponent's attack is over, call your assist. Since you are generally holding down back anyway, it normally works. And since the game now no longer allows you to generally call your assist out of being in block stun, if you mash it, the assist will appear as soon as you are no longer in block stun, leaving it up to you to decide when you want to deal with the situation. Generally, if you're really thinking that the attack is not going to end, you have other options as well. And most of these options, while they do not do a good job of chasing a retreating opponent, don't tend to put you at much risk. But Mar is done for the night in this case. Bringing us back to our There Would Be Villains team.
Trunks, 本気でかかってこい。お願いします、ピッコロさん。It's all or nothing. Fight it out. このままでは。行くぞ。おのれ。覚悟はいいか。くそ。ちょっと脅してやる。ほらそら。大一つの脅してやる。死になさい。その手が甘いですよ。そこですか。そこです。まだまだ。ですよ。まずいな。受けてみろゴーン。激烈コーダー。状態だ。17分だったな。行くよ。やったな的な。どうかやがって。行くよ。そうだな的な。どうした。首の内に下がるんだ。驚いたよ。バカにするな。行くぞ。しまったよ。捕らえた。こいつはどうだい。何の。しまった。捕らえた。なんですって。
Ooh, slip past. Good stuff. In general, that is a standard practice for me. If you can catch my characters, you can kill them. So good luck with that part.
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
Piccolo 18 and Frieza are among the characters who have the strongest escape counterattacks in the game. Namely that once they have decided to try to get away from you, and you have attempted to trap them, or in certain cases even not attempted to trap them, i.e. Piccolo, it does not imply that you're actually safe from them trying to hit you again on the way out if they realize that you didn't do anything. This often means that you have the highest level of safety in your escape. You can contrast this to Videl fairly well. As you can see, she has quite a few options of moves in these situations, but none of them really interrupt her escape to then launch a new attack. At best, she can fake the idea that she's going to escape, but if you can recognize it beforehand, it's no longer a reaction. You could simply make a read and manage to pin her down. But obviously, if you've been watching, you know that I have not generally been playing in these lounges for a while now. I have been doing a lot of testing on bots. The result has generally been shifts in the way that jump-ins and high moves are done, and some shifts in, obviously, one of the most important things in this game, crouch heavy in response to pretty much anything. The more things you can crouch heavy, the stronger you are. Another good reason for your opponent to stay away from you in neutral and not give you the opportunity to do this ever. Stand and crouch heavy have generally very little proration, very little scaling on the moves that follow after them. Super dash in, do as you like. Maybe they're a good time to use a lot of that meter that you've been building up through other interactions such as super dash reposition combos. Other research into DBFZ bots has not really given off that much so far. As mentioned previously, we don't expect to get too much out of Jiren, and Videl is super complicated to use as a bot, probably without her own special inputs. Our current focus is of course Eunice bots, which you should be seeing tomorrow. So we don't expect to be doing too much more work until the next set of characters for Dragon Ball FighterZ Season Pass number 2 are available. The escape abilities of these trio has much less of an effect on Just Flying's team. Once again because they can simply chase with assists, and secondarily because if Nappa is in particularly, both assists that are available are also a shield against any such confusing chase attacks. This means that keeping the other team at bay or forcing them to have to delay things in order to try to get in after is much more effective. Since they're forced to play neutral for so long, there's a lot of situations where the assist just gets to get used without there being too much chance of retaliation. Forcing a use of some other options, specifically the auto combos and long spacings that they have available to them. However, this situation does give 18 her strength, as she's one of the hardest characters to pin down in the game if she's playing the correct way. She can call 17 to absorb any number of attacks meant to anti-air her if her spacing on the jump is correct. Therefore, it takes a certain amount of bravery to not hesitate in those positions, knowing that most of the time if you do it wrong, she'll just absorb all the energy you put into trying to chase her. Even more importantly, even if you have a move that does go up into the air in the correct way, hitting 17 will often cause this move to act as if it is over, as if it has hit its target, and you don't get the benefits. Frieza, with his legendary corner guard, is therefore the next step in that process. You use 18 to get in, and Frieza to hold them there once you've gotten in. Their ability to start and basically convert from pretty much anywhere also adds a lot of stress to this type of matchup. And in this case, making sure to basically lose Piccolo first simplifies the whole process as well. The additional time in the air from the hover to call 17 messes with the opponent's blocking timings as well as their anti-air timings. If you've done the right timing for it, an instant response to her floating there will simply be absorbed by 17's barrier, leaving you open to her drop-in counterattack. I would make a twin drive check joke, but only certain people understand what that means.
A fierce showdown is about to begin.
The easiest way to deal with this is to simply anti-air with super. This works for every character, is super effective, lasts really long, and does raw damage a lot of the time. Only if you cannot afford to spend meter in this way, or your character super is really not good at anti-airing, do you need to worry about this tactic from her long term. And it becomes more or less just a pressure tool that she can occasionally use when the opponent is low on meter, or is otherwise having trouble keeping track of what's going on. In other words, it is so simple to defeat that it becomes hard to defeat. Or rather, it's rather binary. Either you can definitely defeat it, or you're taking a big risk to try anything. Including standing there, so you're probably going to get hit sometimes. This method also prevents a lot of the gain of meter that an 18 team gets when she's on the close-in from the barriers, even when you can't necessarily afford to spend too much meter, or even if you don't think you're most likely going to get too hurt for trying to counter. If you found the right counter that gets you out of the way, you're still facing off with a team that is able to do a lot of damage with meter, has strong, relatively easy auto combos, and decent neutral, and therefore you find yourself constantly facing the threat of taking big damage from all that meter that is absorbed. The other reason to do this is simply that 18 can also barrier herself if she expects a multi-hitting move or other stress, and her barrier interacts with 17's barrier. She does not need one or the other to be up. In fact, it seems to act weirdly in that if they're both up at the exact same time, from my testing, they seem to get double the meter if the move happens to hit them both at the same moment, which is ridiculous, but I'll take it. Using your assist in this way is, however, not recommended, as she can eventually just beat you out by using the assist cancelling form of the move and attacking when your assist is either down or you've had a lot of reason to believe that she will go for certain things. She just goes over your head. Depending on your assist, this can work fine, but most assists do not multi-hit enough, meaning that while they will definitely avoid the problem of making your own character vulnerable, as noted before, if she was really thinking it was going to happen, she could just barrier herself, and this does not generally prevent her from doing moves in the air, or if absolutely necessary, saving herself with Vanish using some of the meter she just got from you doing that. So yes, just counter with super if you have the meter and a good super for it. It is more or less reactable, and her barrier does not absorb any form of super. Therefore, neither does 17's.
The battle's about to start. Good luck!
Other high mobility assist options are much simpler. Piccolo can, in fact, not necessarily as frame 1, but in a lot of situations where he has been placed in a mix-up, he will simply get out. He doesn't have to think about how to do it.
てもらうよ。驚いたよ。
Therefore, he's lot less worried about brawly stuff than most characters. What he does have to worry about is being set up in that situation, but once you force Brawly to have to think about that, your life tends to be easier. Brawly is the main threat against that style of play, because once Freeze is in, he can mostly zone and play around. Frieza also has a lot of moves that allow you to respond to your opponent's counter as basically just a reaction. He has a lot of supers with this property, well, basically his two supers. Technically his third super does the same thing, but obviously you'd be dead and down on the ground at that point.
It's time to face your opponent! Are you ready? Let's go!
甘い。どうした？もうじけづいたぞ。やさんぞ。バカめ。配球権見えたぞ。やさんぞ。
せいぜい楽しませてくれよ。
Here we see approximately the same thing. While Tenzion is not necessarily a character who has a lot of straight-up attacks for coming back in, he is the strongest in this team for that purpose, meaning that if you were going to use shield or chase down assists with the intention of doing that, then he's generally the character against whom you need it. Videl is more so the I'm going to catch you, meaning that Nappa will generally do a decent job, but you really need Cell to protect you when it comes to Tenchion. Based on the time, it looks as if this one is going to stretch into being our last match of the night, unless of course this happens to turn out a massive use of meter into a big finish. But with all assists on deck to shield from Videl, it's not likely to go down that quickly. As it's hard to get strong advantage in that situation, as you can see, spending so much time sitting on 7 meter because it's just too hard to get to use it. But there is one. Not meter usage, but still an advantage. Either way, join us tomorrow for our Unist bots. With the news that it's out at EVO, it seems we're a little late with the release, but maybe with everyone being a bit more hype about it, the bot release will be a little bit cleaner, with more inputs and so on. That was probably not meant to be a pun, but you know how I am. On Monday we will have our usual mix match mishmash Fighter 5 battle lounges. And next week we might actually push for some Guilty Gear lounge as well. The Tuesday train may be leaving the station next week. We will let you know probably on the end of Monday's stream. Guilty Gear is not a game where execution is specifically the main thing that needs to be worked on for most players, although there is some stuff that definitely would benefit. A lot more of that is understanding matchups, and since we have so much experience already with the team as is, building up too much additional skill in that regard is not likely to help out. So standby casuals probably on the Wednesday, back to Kame House on next Thursday, and then around to probably more unit spots, but we'll let you know. You can catch all this at 2_MK_FGC on Twitter, and all our bots are found at 2-mk.org. Vegeta closes us out tonight. This has been Rillian for Team 2MK. Good luck with your training, and good night, everyone.